The Winter War began quietly. Without the dramatic declarations most wars are born from. It emerged in cold silence, in the frozen forests and dark November skies of 1939, when the Soviet Union decided that Finland, small, stubborn, and strategically positioned, needed to be reshaped according to Soviet interests. Many parts of the world barely noticed at first. Europe was still processing the shock of Germany's invasion of Poland. But far in the north, another conflict began to simmer, one that would surprise the world with its brutality, its courage, and its strange imbalance of power. Finland had been part of the Russian Empire for more than a century, before gaining independence in 1917 during the chaos of the Bolshevik Revolution. The Soviet leadership never fully accepted that loss. By the late 1930s, the geopolitical situation in Europe intensified Soviet concerns. Leningrad, one of the Soviet Union's most important cities, sat only about 32 kilometers from the Finnish border, a distance Stalin considered dangerously close. With Germany expanding rapidly, Stalin feared Finland could one day be used as a bridge for an attack on the Soviet Union. Whether this fear was sincere or simply convenient, he demanded that Finland give up territory on the Karelian Isthmus and allow Soviet bases on Finnish soil. Finland refused. It was a small country, but it valued independence above comfort. No nation willingly gives up pieces of itself simply because a larger neighbor demands it. On November 26, 1939, shells exploded near the Soviet village of Mainila. The Soviet government immediately accused Finland of firing on Soviet territory. Finland denied responsibility. Evidence later suggested that the Soviets had likely shelled their own land to justify an invasion, a staged provocation meant to create moral cover for aggression. The Soviet Union broke off diplomatic relations with Finland and declared that Finland had committed hostile acts. 4 days later, the Red Army crossed the border. At dawn on November 30th, Soviet bombers flew over Helsinki. Explosions tore through homes, schools, and tram lines. Civilians died. The Soviet government insisted it was not a war, calling it a police operation. But the burning sky and smoking ruins told another story. Along the border, massive Soviet infantry units and tank divisions advanced into the forests of Karelia. The Soviets expected a fast victory. It had millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, and an enormous air force. Finland had roughly 300,000 soldiers, limited artillery, and almost no armored vehicles. On paper, the war should have ended quickly. But the winter did not care about mathematics. The Finnish army understood its terrain better than anyone. The forests were dense, freezing, unfamiliar to outsiders. Temperatures fell to -40 degrees. Finnish soldiers moved on skis, blended into the snow with white camouflage, and used silence as a weapon. Soviet soldiers, many from warmer regions, were poorly equipped for winter. Their clothing was thin, their boots froze, their weapons jammed in the cold. Commanders made decisions from maps, not from the harsh reality outside. Finnish troops used Matti tactics, breaking large Soviet formations into isolated pockets and destroying them one by one. Soviet units found themselves lost in the forests, cut off and unable to maneuver. Finnish snipers became an even darker threat, especially one man, Simo Haiha, known as the White Death. Dressed entirely in white, he eliminated hundreds of Soviet soldiers with chilling precision, often without a scope to avoid revealing his position. His legend spread quickly, terrifying Soviet troops. On the Karelian Isthmus stood the Mannerheim Line, Finland's main defensive network. It wasn't as massive as some European fortifications, but it was smartly designed using natural terrain. The Soviets assumed it would collapse easily. Instead, it resisted for months. Soviet tanks became trapped in minefields or hit by fire from concealed bunkers. Finnish soldiers destroyed tanks with gasoline bottles, later known as Molotov cocktails. The Soviets, who mocked the weak Finnish forces, soon learned how dangerous underestimation could be. Winter itself became a battlefield. The Finns adapted, the Soviets suffered. In many Soviet units, frostbite cases outnumbered combat injuries. Vehicles froze, rifles broke, men collapsed from exposure. Some soldiers slept beside burning trucks just to stay warm. Others reported weapons shattering from the cold. Finnish soldiers, used to the harsh environment, treated the cold not as an enemy, but as an ally. The world watched with admiration. Newspapers praised Finland's bravery. Volunteers came from Sweden, Norway, Denmark, France, Britain, and even the United States. But governments hesitated. Europe was preparing for a wider conflict with Germany. No nation wanted to provoke the Soviet Union, so Finland fought alone. Despite their early failures, the Soviets adapted. They replaced incompetent commanders, reorganized units, and adjusted strategies. They built wooden roads over snow, refined artillery tactics, and used overwhelming firepower. By February 1940, their assaults grew far stronger. The Mannerheim Line began to break under relentless bombardment. After 105 days of brutal combat, the war ended on March 13, 1940. Finland signed the Moscow Peace Treaty, ceding 11% of its territory, including industrial centers and key defensive zones. Entire towns were evacuated. Families abandoned homes they had lived in for generations. But Finland did not fall. It remained independent. For a nation so small facing an army so large, survival itself was a victory. The Winter War exposed Soviet weaknesses and Finnish resilience. It showed that small nations, when fighting for their existence, can resist far larger powers. It reminded the world that arrogance, poor planning, and underestimating an enemy can turn a predicted quick victory into a long, painful struggle. In the frozen forests of Finland, courage outweighed numbers, and a nation too small to win still refused to lose.